The white city of Ithil stood like a lamp against the Ephel, its battlements silvered by the cold light of the waxing moon. Once Isildur's jewel and watch upon the shadow, Minas Ithil had for long years kept the passes of Cirith Ungol and Morgul Vale. But in the year when whispers thickened like mist upon the river, black standards were seen beneath the mountain spurs, and a host moved out of Mordor in hush and iron and fear. Captain Belthad, a man of Númenórean blood, made lean by long vigilance, walked the eastern battlement. Beside him paced Lirion, a healer of Ithilien whose hands remembered summer leave, and Cirion, the loremaster, keeper of old craft, whose grey eyes had learned the stern language of stones and stars. 3 nights, Belthad murmured, and no trumpet answers from Osgiliath. We stand alone. Not alone, said Cirion, laying a hand upon the marble coping. Within these walls, the Ithil stone abides. Through it, the west may speak, and counsel may come. Lirion's gaze sought the peaks where the pass climbed like a wound. A voice was on the wind, cold and thin. There is counsel, perhaps, she said low, but there is also listening. Below, dark pavilions opened like bruises, and above them, a cry like iron on glass answered the moon. At dawn, the host of the Nine unfurled its ringed spears. They did not sound the drum nor swing the banner gaily. Rather a hush went before them, as if speech itself had grown afraid. Men of the garrison watched from crenel and bartizan. Their breath smoked in the cold that bled from Mordor's line. Belthad sent swift-eyed runners along every stair and lane. The wells were rationed, the granaries barred, the moon helms issued to the watch. A sally was not yet dared. The enemy's strength was unguessed, and among them moved captains with unseen faces, whose presence weighed on mortal hearts. At sunset, a herald in black came riding without sound of hoof. He raised no voice, but a lesser man at his side cried in Sindarin with an old, unnatural accent, "Yield the moon tower and the seeing stone. One gate, one key, one mercy. Return to your master," Belthad answered from the wall, "and tell him Minas Ithil yields only light." The herald turned, and then, as the last of daylight failed, there rose from the vale a shape upon a winged thing, and its cry pierced helm and marrow alike. Some fell to their knees, others clutched amulets and spoke old names. Lirion stood with tears in her eyes, and did not know she wept. It is like remembering a grief not yet begun. "Which king?" Belthad said. "The Lord of the Nine has come." Deep in the tower's heart lay a round chamber walled with black marble, veined like frozen lightning. Near its center, upon a carven pedestal, slept a sphere clear as night-washed water. The Ithil stone, elder brother to the Anor stone, and kin to the master stone beyond mortal grasp. Girion entered first, bearing no torch, for light blossomed and withered in the stone, as if the moon itself breathed there. He bowed, not in worship, but with the respect owed to elder things, and spoke words old in Gondor. Lirion watched from the threshold, feeling the prickle of snow behind her eyes. Belthad kept to the door, helm in crook of arm, shoulders tense as a drawn bow. Cirion's thoughts went out like swallows to the west. Far beacons gleamed as sparks. Anorion across the river, the white roofs of Minas Anor, the river brazen span of Osgiliath. "I see smoke," he said. "Not of war. Kitchens and forges, sure order. Letters fly. There is movement in the city of stars." "Relief?" Belthad asked. "A stirring. I cannot name it. Yet I hear a rumor of trumpets." The sphere darkened. Then, like a door opened on a winter night, a cold reached through and touched Cirion's brow. Lirion moved, but he lifted a hand and, gently, set aside her concern. "It is naught. The stone grows dim only to see more keenly. We must look again ere dawn." From the tower's high windows, the moon climbed the torn backs of the mountains. Far below, the first siege fires were kindled. On the second night, under a broken scud of cloud, Belthad led a chosen band out of the postern gate in the northward wall. The door was masked by a garden of moon roses, whose white petals gleamed like frost. Few in the city knew it, and fewer had walked there since boyhood. Now a dozen men with faces ash-gray from chalked ash slid into the gloom and crossed the rocky skirts of the vale like hunters. Their aim was simple and old, to burn the siege engines before they were mated and braced, to cut the quiet throat of a hostile night. They fell upon a battery with oil and steel, working in hush. Flames woke. A tower groaned. Shouts rose thin and false, as if the air itself disliked the sound of alarm. Then came a shadow with no body to cast it. A rider upon a steed not of flesh stooped low, and the courage of men frayed like old rope. Belthad cried a name in the tongue of Numenor, and some stood fast, others fled, and still the engines cracked to embers. At last, the captain called retreat. They ran beneath the unlit edge of the mountain, and the enemy did not press far, for the wall sent answering shafts of silver, and the narrow alleys had teeth. Belthad counted his living and his dead, and found both wanting, and though the engines were broken, the vale did not grow warmer. Small victories, he told Lirian. They buy us nights. Perhaps that is all we shall ever buy. There is lore that sleep, and lore that wake. In the workshop of the upper tower, Sirion drew a cloth from a thing of Numenorian craft seldom named, the Ithilmir, the moon mirror, polished in the elder days with powders lost, and oils remembered by few. It gathered the cold rays of the moon and loosed them again, knit into a single spear of pallor. It could not burn stone, it could not topple walls, but it had virtue against unclean airs and the sickly light that corrupts the mind's edge. "That is a relic," Belthad said, half wondering. "I had thought it a tale for children at hearth." "Tales for children," Kirion answered, smiling briefly, "are the husks of truths men have forgotten." Night deepened. The Witch King's mount stooped again to rake the walls with dread. From the tower top, Lirian turned the disc, and Sirion's hand steadied the aim. A thread of sharpened moonlight leapt and struck the creature. It screamed, less in hurt than anger, and rose away. The wind smelt, for a moment, of mountain snow instead of grave salt. "Do not rejoice too greatly," Kirion said, weary. "It is a warding, not a sword. It will buy us a night, and a thought more clearly seen. And one night added to the world's account," Belthad replied, "is no poor purchase." On the third day, a gull flew up from the river and beat at the tower window until it fell faint into Lirian's hand. A thong was tied to its leg, and a strip of parchment thereon, blotted and water-stained. Osgiliath had lit the beacons that look eastward. A bridge guard held. Rumor of sails upon the Anduin flowed like whispered wine. Kirion went again to the stone. "I see pennons among the arches," he said, in a slow voice. "I hear hammers upon plank and spar. Men mustering beneath the dome of stars. The king hears. The king moved." Belthad blew out a long breath he did not know he had kept. "Then we must endure until his hand closes." That evening, while the moon was yet thin upon the flank of the sky, the Witch King sent again his herald. He did not wait for parley. The black standard was driven into the ground, as one would plant a spear in a slain heart, and around it, men in mail of strange, silent pattern took their places as if the ground itself had spoken a command. The battering rams came on like patient beasts. The fourth night was cruel. Stones fell. A tower lost its crown. In the lower courts, children ran with bundles and cats. Old men muttered sea prayers. Women sang, because their mothers had taught them to sing when fear narrowed the world. Belthad sent 2 boats down a secret water stair that ran from the city's cisterns to the Anduin. The narrow craft slid under rush and reed, beneath a spill of ivy, where the moon washed leaves like small coins. In each boat was a runner, a good man of Ithilien, who could read the river as a ranger reads dust. One returned at dawn, his hands raw, his face bleached as if snow had burned it. "My lord," he whispered, bowing to Belthad, and then to Lirian as if there were sacrament in her eyes. "Osgiliath is quiet, not taken. No, I did not see banners foul, but quiet. The forges cold, the watchfires low. I heard the river on stone, and nothing else, save save a stirring like breath behind a door. The king? Sirion asked. The runner swallowed. If he moves, he does so as a ghost whom doors do not heed. He turned his gaze down. I left my brother upon the water. He did not return. The tower seemed to grow thinner, as if time had fed upon it a little, as wolves will gnaw a bone even while other meat lies nearer. At noon, a white scarf was raised upon the wall, not in surrender, but for parley. Belthad descended with 2 men, and met the herald where the shadows of the mountains fell. Over them drifted the smell of rot and raw metal. The earth at the herald's feet was powdered, as if frost had passed them. The herald's voice had the ring of old sea caves and the restlessness of waves tamed to iron law. "My master is merciful," he said. "He will take the seeing stone and depart. He will leave food and safe passage for the folk of the vale. He desires little." Belthad laughed once without joy. "He desires to put an eye in the sky. Little." The herald inclined his head as if to a child. "He desires what will come to him in any case." Then the shadow moved, and the lord of the Nazgul himself stood upon a rise. He spoke no word, but such words flooded the minds of those who looked on him that afterward they could not say what they had heard, only that the heart of hope seems folly when such a voice names it so. Sirion's hand gripped the rail above, where he watched. His lips formed a single word, as if it answered a question none had asked. "Yield?" "No," Lyrian whispered. "No." The parley ended. Banners dipped. Thunder grew. The rams came on, and with them that taste of iron and of old sorrow, and the day crawled like a wounded beast toward night. Stone buckled. A gate screamed. The moon mirror's beam held the air cold and a little clean, and still the black pavilions crept nearer, like stains spread by rain. In the deepest night, while the watch was set, and the wounded called for water, Sirion descended into the undervaults, where the foundations ran like roots of a white tree into rock. He bore with him a small lamp of cut glass that made a wick of moonlight. There were few keys for this place, and he held them all. On the furthest door, his hand faltered. His face had grown drawn. A shadow lay upon his brow like an unwholesome crown. Lyrian had followed softly, silent as a memory. She set her hand upon his wrist. "You walk as if some other will moves your feet." He smiled without mirth. "What will is truly one's own, lady. The stone shows us truth. It is truth we resist." "You have looked long into it," she said. "Not long enough," he answered, "for in it I saw rescue, and now I see only that rescue delayed is defeat multiplied. The stone must go west. The enemy desires it. Yes, that is plain, and therefore we deny him. We send it by the secret road to the river, and though we lose the city, we keep the west's sight." Belthad, arriving with the pace of a man who will not frighten a friend, heard the tale of this and nodded slowly. "I had thought the same. Osgiliath may be slow to wake, but the Anduin yet runs. We will send it with a guard. Sirion, you will guide, for you and the stone are well met." Lyrian looked from one to the other. In Sirion's eyes there was a faint glimmer as of distant water seen at night. Too still. The stone was hooded in a black cloth that drank light and gave none back. A handful of chosen men, and Lyrian, for her surety of heart, went with Kirion through the water stair and into the cool throat of the underworld where the city's hidden stream sped away like time. The tunnels were old and sweet, with the smell of wet rock. At a place where the stone widened to a silent pool, boats lay as if asleep. They pushed off, hugging the darkness. At intervals, Sirion would lift the veil and peer into the hooded glow, then point. "There, the river will be gentler. That way. Hush, wait." Twice they hid beneath overhang and fern root as shadows crossed the water. Once, Lyrian thought she heard a voice that called Sirion's childhood name, though she did not know it. They came at last to a culvert where the stream fled into the Anduin. The moon sat upon the river like a coin in a king's palm. Sirion lifted the stone a last time. He smiled, and his smile was not his own. "Why do you smile?" Lyrian whispered. "Because it is ended," he said. And then he stood, and, without haste, without rage, he flung the veil aside so the stone shone naked and he lifted it high that its cold light fell upon the marsh, and the river, and the road. From the reeds a figure rose, and then another, terrible in silence. A shadow on wings moved above with a sound like a grave slab settling. Men froze. One cried out. Lirian reached for the stone, and Sirion did not resist. "You were guiding us," she breathed, "by its light, with its will." He looked at her, and for a heartbeat his eyes were his own, too full of grief to be borne. "I could not let it go to waste in a tomb of water." He promised that if I brought it, he would take only the stone. "And leave whom?" Lirian asked. "Those I love," he said. "Those you love. A lie, perhaps, but oaths spoken in the mind while the stone gazes are not so easily judged." The Nazgul descended. The world became cold and sharp. Lirian drew her small knife as if she had drawn a memory. It was not enough. Men fell without cries. The stone was taken into iron hands and veiled again, this time beyond her reach. When she woke, if waking it was, the dawn had not yet found the river. Sirion lay beside her, breathing. His hair had gone white, as if winter had crossed it in a single night. In Minas Ithil, the last gate broke at sunset on the 5th day. The Witch King entered without haste, for victory was a cloak he knew too well to be hurried by its settling. He passed beneath arch and lintel, and through courts of marble and silent fountains, and wherever he looked, the stones themselves seemed to turn away. Belthad gathered the remnant of his guard upon the high stair. No horn sounded. There was no music left in them. When the enemy came to the tower foot, the moon mirror shivered on its stem and dropped like a petal of ice. "Captain of Shadows," the Lord of the Nine said, and though his voice wove through iron and malice, there was somewhere a courtesy so old it had become cruel. "You have bought knights with lives. The coin is spent." "It was well spent," Belthad answered, "and I will spend the last of me likewise." They fought then, not as men fight for victory, but as they fight to measure their own hearts. One by one Belthad's companions fell. He stood until standing itself was beyond him. The Witch King set his iron-shod boot upon the threshold of the tower, and claimed the House of the Moon. That night, a sickly radiance began to pulse in the vale, as if something in the earth had soured and now bled light. The fair name of the city was twisted upon an unclean tongue. Minas Ithil, Moon Tower, was called Minas Morgul, and above Far Harad and near Run, men waking from strange dreams shivered and could not say why. Lirian and the survivors came by hidden paths through the beaches of Ithilien. They moved like ghosts and did not speak of the river. In her breast, Lirian carried not the seeing stone, that was gone, but a shard of the moon mirror, wrapped in linen and bound with her hair. When she pressed it to her eyelids, there sighed through her a cold that was not despair. And for a moment she could imagine clean winter on high roads and starlight fallen upon fathomless snow. At Osgiliath, the lamps were kindled at last, haltingly, as if each flame tested the air before committing itself. The king's men took them in. Questions were asked and written down, and none of the answers were satisfying. The stone was lost. Minas Ithil had fallen. The captain who had held the wall was surely ash in shadow. In years counted not by harvest, but by the memory of a light that went wrong, the veil of the moon learned a new silence. Once the night came soft from the high shoulders of the Ephel-Duath, and the stars seemed to stoop and drink from the fountains of Ithil. Now a pale rot bled outward from the taken tower, and the grass grew with an over-eager whiteness, as if the earth had learned to mimic the moon without remembering its grace. Frogs were fewer. Birds gave up their dawn for later hours. The wind that wandered among the beaches came back changed, like a friend returned from a long voyage, with a strange new caution in his eyes. The city was renamed by foes, and names bent fate like iron bends a river. Minas Ithil, Tower of the Rising Moon, was called Minas Morgul, and in the turning of that word, men heard the sigh of a gate closing. Yet a gate is also a measure of what lies beyond it. Those who fled did not forget the true name. They kept it in their mouths, as one keeps a coin for bread, yet unbought. When the children asked what that ghostly luminescence was that spilled sometimes from the veil, the mothers answered, "A false dawn, little star. The true moon rises elsewhere." Lirian, whose hands remembered summer leaves, even when winter determined the sky, took to a task not set by any captain. She went among the broken households and made lists: bread and blanket, herbs and shelter, names of the missing and names of the found. And when the lists grew too long, she made another, a kinder ledger. Memories that must not be abandoned. She wrote down the details the darkness cannot counterfeit. Where old Baran used to hang his line for river fish, the sound Belthad's boots made on the stair above the east court, a steadying tap, the scent of quince blossom in a certain lane where children ran after cats, the quiet courage of Sirion's first smile each morning before the stone had darkened. These her lists called back, and because men grew steadier when they spoke them aloud, she gathered folk after sundown and let them recite. It was a small art, the art of saying what had been good. The Morgul light pushed at their shutters, the lantern of memory pushed back, and for an hour each night it held. She worked also where work has no poetry, at the wash-tubs, at the stair where the wounded were hauled, in the alley where a frightened child would not come out, because someone had spoken the Witch King's title too near him. To such a one she gave not words but a willow whistle, and taught him to make a thin parting sound like river air in summer reeds. He stopped shaking, first to listen, and then to breathe, and then to smile, because the sound was his. Only once did Sirion ask to be judged, and that was to a stone. He walked by night to the western window of Osgiliath, where the Anduin runs like a stern council between the twin cities, and set his hands upon the sill until cold took them. "I have brought our enemy a lamp," he said to the dark. "I have brightened a road that should have been kept for clouds and stars alone." The river made no sermon, but it abides in the nature of water to insist upon truths that stone sometimes refuses. What goes down can rise in mist. What is lost may yet serve as rain to a field never seen. When Lirian found him there, the white in his hair had become a kind of crown that humbled him rather than aggrandized. He did not weep. He had done with that sort of payment. He spoke instead of tasks that could be performed with a steady hand and a quiet heart, teaching young scribes the stern kindness of map, cataloging herbs most potent when the terror chill falls upon soldiers after battle, writing in a script so careful that the letters themselves seemed to breathe, the names of the fallen on a tablet of cedar for a hall that would one day be raised. "Long labor," he said, "for a debt that will not end by any coin I know." "Then let it be long," Lirian answered. "Things that end quickly teach poor lessons. In Minas Ithil there is an arcade facing east, so fashioned that its columns take the first light as a cup takes wine. When the city learned how Minas Ithil had been taken, the bells tolled a long note that made even the horses set their feet more carefully, and many names were sounded in solemn order in a hall where lamplight and stillness keep company. But for Belthad there was a different manner of remembrance. A mason of the old craft carved his name in a stone no bigger than a baker's loaf, and set it where no trumpet would ever call attention to it, under a low arch, at the height of a child's gaze. A boy found it first, reading slowly in the way of boys to whom letters are still a landscape. "Belthad," he said, making the syllables strong. He held a wall. His mother nodded, and told him the wall's name. The boy returned the next day, and brought a crumb of honey cake and left it there, because to his mind that was the proper gift for someone who had stood where fear was loud. Years later, the city would lie under a different shadow, and men would run with other cares. Still the stone remained, and the small courtesy of the cake was not wasted, for mice have their griefs too, and a sweetness shared is not a theft from any book of honor. In Ithilien there falls a curtain of water, like a white scarf let slip by a careful hand. In certain sunsets, the spray makes a color like wine poured through crystal, and the west beyond shines through. Men would one day give it a new name, and make of it a refuge and a watch window. Before there was policy, there was simply discovery. Lirian came to the place by following the sound that any healer knows, the sound of water that runs neither too fast for rest nor too slow for foulness. She laid a hand upon the rock and knew it was old and honest. Out of her bundle she took the shard she had kept from the fell night of the stone's taking, the moon mirror splinter, faintly cold even in summer. She wrapped it in linen once more, and set it in a niche of the cave, where it would gather mist and give it back as a coolness in the air. She did not know for what use, only that places choose their purposes when men honor them. She spoke a blessing, not pagan nor priestly, but born of a woman's long patience. Let fear spend itself before the fall. Let courage keep its feet after. Later, rangers would bring fevered men here, and marvel that the chill did not pierce, but soothe. A captain would swear that he dreamt no nightmares in that cave, though he had dreamed nothing else for weeks. A young man with a scar where despair had once been would smile in his sleep. None of them knew Lirian's name then, but the cave kept it, which is the better way. It was told among those who love rivers that Osgiliath did not fail because the Anduin withdrew her favor. It failed for a season because men could not tell, in time, what voice spoke in their council. Some heard the stirrings of trumpets in the Palantiri. Others heard only an echo bent by a will that hates coordination in free folk. Orders were written that contradicted themselves by a day. Ships were made ready when horses were needed. A messenger loitered at an alehouse with untouched drink because the door he meant to enter seemed suddenly unfriendly, as if it remembered him too clearly from some future embarrassment. When the sleep was broken, and the city of stars shook herself and meant at last to stand in the ancient fashion, it was too late for Minas Ithil. That is not a condemnation, but a lesson. Clocks are not kind in war, and those who speak peaceably in the hour of the trumpet sometimes do so not from virtue, but from a suggestion hung in their hearts by a distant, watching eye. Osgiliath awoke with a start and a shame, and no people rises better than a people that hopes to deserve forgiveness. She set her stones aright, coaxed her bridges to strength, and sent out small, swift boats toward every bank and bend where folk might be hidden with need. Sirion wrote a book with no eloquence in it, and therefore much comfort. He called it The Winter Stars of Gondor, and on each page he set a clear, spare drawing of a heaven sight with marks for the watch captain, where to find the sober constellations when minds are tired, how to use them in fog and snow, which ones set earliest in spring, and what quiet names the old fishers have for them. He wrote, in one margin only, a sentence that is not of astronomy. When the bitter cold of dread falls upon a host, look up together and speak the familiar things aloud. Seldom do such books travel far. They hide in the hands that need them. His little book did, and to places he never saw. A youth in Anorian took it on a winter watch and learned to love a pattern of 7 small fires low in the west. A ring of riders on the Pelennor named a dull star after their most patient horse. A woman on a river barge made a song of 3 constellations that predict dawn after a troubled night. So the book traveled, and in the singing of its pages, Kirion found a work to stand between his long guilt and his long hope. A lord of terror does not always reap with sword and scythe. Sometimes he walks among the sleeping in measures which dreams can be soured. In Minas Morgul, the palantir was set upon a table of iron shaped like a lily with bent petals, and in the black hours before dawn, a hand that was and was not a hand turned it so that it drew not on what was true, but on what might be made to appear truer than truth. Messages that were meant to run straight began to wander. Faces seen in the sphere seemed to hold back counsel even when they spoke it. Those who gazed too long could no longer taste bread without recalling ash. One night a captain in Minas Anor bent above the Anor stone and saw, out of the dark, a great shadow move against a field of fire. He stood there until his knees failed, and afterward mislaid an order that would have saved a day's labor and a boy's life. He did not know why his hand trembled, only that an eye in the deep yearned to see him live where the world is thinner. A summer later that captain laid down his charge and became a teacher of children. he did not trust himself with horns and spears. He taught letters to a class that did not know what was saving the city was the safer. The harvest of the Witch King is not always what he intends. Terror can drive a good man from his post, but it can also set him where the enemy's long designs find less purchase. A child who knows his letters holds a wall one day, a woman who kept her voice steady, while the Palantir called to her once, twice, thrice, will one night turn a counsel back from folly, with nothing but a question shaped like a song. Years after the fall, on a night when the river was a black road laid down for the convenience of stars, a boatman whose oars had never lied to him stopped upon a bend and rested because his arms remembered grief. He saw, on the bank where the reeds grow patient, a woman whose hair did not decide whether to be silver or the color of straw. She was singing to the water, not because it is wise, but because sometimes it is inevitable. He rested and listened until her song became his breath. In the morning he left a sack of wheaten bread on that bank without looking to see if the woman took it. He could not have told her to be brave. Only bread says such things without presumption. In another year, a ranger in a coat of leaf green sat where roots have made a seat, and mended a boot by the light of a lantern he shaded from the road. A chill came, not like weather, but like news. He held up the lantern and saw nothing at all, and that was worse than a wolf's eyes. It seemed to him that the water drew back as if a hand had splayed under it. He whispered an old river prayer and, remembering what he had been taught, breathed out slowly so that his fear had to choose whether to remain without air. It left him. The boot held thereafter. The road held too. In a third year, Sirion himself stood above the culvert where the stone once went, laughing to its doom. He laid upon the stonework a small folded sheet, the plan for a new span to be built in Osgiliath so that men could pass from council to labor with fewer steps lost. He said, "I traded our tower for a drawing. Take the better of the two, river." The river, which knows most tradesmen make, lifted a thin scallop of wave and let it fall. The drawing slid into the night and was gone. Foundations were laid for the new span that spring. No one ever asked for the plan again. Once each spring, the hills above the vale put forth a flower that seems to have learned color from bone. Its petals are narrow and slightly curled, and its scent is like apples that have been kept too long in a cool room. Folk would not pluck it. They said, "It belongs to the place that sours light," and left it. But a girl of 12, whose brother had been taught to run by Belthad in the practice court, came and sat among the bitter flowers and tried to braid them. They would not bend. She laughed and said, "Have it your way," and instead braided her own hair. She came down from the hill taller by an inch, which is the way of girls who have told sorrow a story and found it listening. When the bitter flowers withered, as even stubborn blossoms must, their seed shook down and went into the ground where old roots map patience. The next spring fewer came. The spring after that, fewer still. Men did not mark this, for our eyes look bravely to edges and skyline. The earth marked it. She is a slow prophetess, and what she knows she says with leave. In the Tower of Governance at Minas Ithil, there is a side room where the steward retires to speak to maps. In that room, a candle is kept in a blue glass. It gives light like milk, made thin. One steward in his middle years, who had taken the charge not with joy, but with something harder and more faithful, came to that room weary from the day. He lit the candle and did not at first look at the great chart of the realm. He set his hand upon the table, palm down, and spoke as if he expected no answer. "Give me men who can tell longing from luring. Give me women who can stand in a door and send men to either side with a word, yet never raise their voice." He did not know that in that hour a woman with a shard of mirror slept in Ithilien, and a teacher of letters in the lower city taught a boy to divide a word into syllables so that its weight fell where it should. He knew only that a good candle in honest glass makes a little covenant with the dark, and that the map is all edges unless there are hands to go with it. Years measure themselves by the stars and the stubborn duties of land and house, but there is another way to count, by what a people refuses to let be taken. Minas Ithil was taken. Minas Morgul was set where it had stood, like a scarecrow in a king's raiment, yet night by night the true moon kept her course. A hard courtesy to a world that had not earned it, and when she hung plump and near in autumn over the white city, there were those who rose from their beds and went to rooftops and said nothing, which is a form of praise. A mason working late on a parapet paused to drink, and saw upon the plaster a faint sheen, as if frost had passed, though the air was warm. He touched it with a thumb and tasted a memory, the smell of rosemary in Lyrian's satchel, the sound of Sirion's careful quill, the thud of Belthad's boot upon the stair. He went back to work, and set his stones with more patience. The wall held through a winter storm men later called the wolf's mouth, when wind chewed at corners and tried to eat Eve. "My friend," wrote Lyrian in a letter she never sent to Sirion because some gifts are too near to be carried by paper, "you once told me that seeing is not wisdom, and that the eye which looks must be stronger than the vision. I have thought on this while setting fevered children under a fall of water that writes on air. There is another truth near it. Hearing is not obedience. The heart that hears must be freer than the voice that calls to it. A day will come when a horn will sound from the east road, and many will think it is doom, but some will hear the same note and think, at last, we are summoned to what we have been practicing all our lives. Let us be such folk, you and I, not because we are brave, but because we have taught our hands to know one another in the dark." She sealed the letter in wax because finishing things gives them weight, even when they do not travel. She placed it in a wooden box with a ribbon from a child's hair and a shard of blue glass from a steward's candle she had once been given to carry between rooms. The box she hid where no one would think to look, behind a jar of ordinary barley. Ordinary things are the best safes in any house. There came, longer after than grief would have preferred, a night when wind brought different news down from the mountain. It was still sour and tasted of metals, but beneath it ran a draught of high cold like a remembered laugh. Those at watch on the eastern roofs of Minas Ithil saw, far off, a stirring about the sickly tower, as if the light it cast were not lasting, as it had seemed, but a kind of spilling that left a stain even as it thinned. They did not know what this meant, but the youngest among them smiled without choosing to smile, and an older man found that his bad knee did not ache until dawn. In the following winter, a certain banner in a certain ill house failed to lift on a night wind that had never failed to flatter it before. There are those who marked such things and wrote nothing down, because some news is not fit for books, being too brittle while it is being born. Yet in taverns where soldiers slip between speech and silence, with a skill honed by need, talk altered, not bolder, but steadier. "If a banner can hang heavy in that place," said a one-eyed veteran, "then sooner or later a door will forget to close." In a spring, when almond trees were rash with blossom, and the market in the lower city smelled of fresh mint and warm cloth, the steward dreamed he stood in a field of dun grasses that had learned to speak. They made a sound like the sea one hears in a shell. Through them came a man in a green cloak. He did not hasten, he did not bow. He lifted a hand, and in it was neither message nor weapon, only a little book bound in plain leather. He set it down on the map table and said, "Do not forget the small northing. The enemy loves the broad road." When the steward woke, there was no book on his table, but he smiled as if he had been given one. He walked out upon the balcony that faces the morning, and the first sun stroked the mountains, and he whispered the names of old beacons and newer ones, Amon Din, Eilenach, Nardol, and others that men would add, because vigilance is a tree that grows when watered. He did not know that a woman in Ithilien had woken at the same hour with river mist in her hair and a purpose in her chest, like a bird deciding for flight. Old men take to small obediences with a reverence young men give to grand vows. Sirion's last duty was neither book nor counsel, but a walk he made each morning to the bakery at the corner where the street bends toward the river. He bought 2 loaves. One he ate by slices through the day. The other he left on the sill of the house, whose dwellers had once opened their door at midnight to soldiers with news too heavy for lamps. No one asked why. No one thanked him. It is a grace of cities that certain mercies are allowed to be quiet. On the day he died, he did not go to the bakery. The baker's wife wrapped the second loaf anyway, for habit is a kind of honor. Lirian found it on the sill at dusk, and brought it home and placed it by his bed. And then she understood. She sat and spoke to him, though he could not hear, as one speaks to a king who has ridden far away to do a work beyond report. She told him of the boy who now taught other boys to divide words and cast weights, of the captain who sang to the bitter flowers and made them accept his pride, of the ranger who had learned to breathe until fear withdrew for lack of air. When she finished, she broke the bread and ate it slowly, and then extinguished the candle. He had brought a darkness into the world once. He had bought back much light. A life may be counted by such exchanges. No prophet stood in any hall to say how the pale fire would end. There were only hints, like the way certain cats would not look toward the east after midnight, or how children playing at kings and heralds no longer gave anyone the witch-king's part after a certain summer, declaring by a law older than parchment that there were to be no black wings today. Women mending on stoops remarked to one another that the Morgul glow seemed more like a memory than a promise. A man pruning vines found that the iron tang in the air had eased, and that wine took on again the flavor of the hill rather than the ash of the neighbor's roof. And then, far away, and yet in every courtyard, came a different wind. It smelled of rain that has walked long over stone and turned compassionate. It spoke to bells, and bells answered. Had there been a palantir on any honest table in any honest house, it would have shown nothing at all, because some victories happen where eyes are of no use. Walls shook in far lands, and a crown of malice unseated itself. A tower made to outstare the sun found that it had been looking down into a well all its days, and in the veil of the moon the pale rot failed, as a mold fails when the loaf is hardened by the oven, and turned to service. That night, from the beaches of Ithilien down to the reeds of Pelargir, laughter went ahead of sleep like a scout. Men did not know their reason. Reasons could be catalogued in slower years. It was enough to find, waking to let the cat in, that the cat had already come and sat very straight, with bright eyes, as if it had seen a curtain lifted. A seed was left in shadow. That is how the tale ended before. In the years that followed, it broke soil. Lirian grew thin as all travelers grow thin when they carry many names. She wore a plain ring and a plain cloak, and went from house to house until there were fewer houses that needed her than houses that asked for her anyway, to bless a birth or lay a hand upon a sorrow not wide enough to count in the city record. She who had kept the moon mirror's splinter learned to give counsel without lenses, and to make of her gaze a thing that did not burden those who met it. Young rangers under beech and birch learned a vow that is not written, to refuse the ease that the enemy offers. They practiced making camp without a fire, when a fire would have cheated their courage. They practiced making one when cold would have done the same. They learned to name the bright water's paths, and to close their ears to speech that came to them from no mouth. And when they grew old, they taught boys and girls those same 2 arts. Accept hardship, where ease will steal your footing. Accept ease, where hardship will steal your strength. In the east, a tower forgot its manners, and fell without grace. In the west, a boy found that the stone bearing Belthad's name had been worn by many small hands, and he polished it with his sleeve until it caught a ray of morning and gave it back. The epilogue ends as all right endings end, not with a door shut, but with a road accounted for. Minas Ithil was lost, and Minas Morgul raised in its place. Yet the people of the West learned not to spend their hate where their hope ought to be. They put the hate aside, as one sets aside a tool chosen in haste. They learned, under bitter light, the arts they would need when true dawn came: patience and good maps, bread left on a sill without a name, the courage of small northings, and the care of a shard in a cave where a waterfall writes on air. When at last other horns sounded, and other beacons woke, those who heard them did not wonder what to do. They had been rehearsing all their lives, and if the moon, on certain nights, seemed a little brighter over the white city, that was not magic, but gratitude. Light remembers where it has been welcomed, and beyond the mountains, beyond the last reach of roads men can mend, the wind that had once carried a cry like iron on glass now carried, faint and fierce, the applause of leaves. Only Sirion, gray-haired now as an old man, and humbled like a tree after lightning, knelt before the king's envoys and begged pardon. "There is none to give," they told him, which was true and untrue both. In Minas Ithil, when word came, the bells tolled. The rumor that had flickered in the stone was no lie. There had been movement, councils met, ships made ready, hosts gathered, but slow and tangled by old divisions and hindered by whispers without a source, so that when the tide was fair, the orders were not. The enemy had laid, unseen, a net in men's hearts that no palantir could fully name. That was the twist of it, not that the stone lied, but that it told truths set upon a board the enemy himself had arranged. Years later, some of those who had escaped the veil returned as rangers, learning to be thin as shadows and quick as silence, to harry the dark roads and lead those who were hunted by it. In a cave of falling water, Henneth Anun, named anew, Lyrian set the shard of the moon mirror, where it would catch no eye but honest one, to cool fevered brows and steady hearts that had looked too long into fear. As for Sirion, he spent his days in quiet service, nursing sick, scribing for the poor. When asked what he had seen in the stone, he would answer only, "Enough to know that seeing is not wisdom. The eye that looks must be stronger than the vision." He never again went down to the river by night. Beltad's name was carved, when there was leisure, upon a small tablet set in an arcade facing east. The wind from the mountains would sometimes bring with it a thin sweetness of snow and high places. Those who stood there to read would look up and, for a breath, imagine the moon a little brighter. Thus was the siege of Minas Ithil accomplished, and the tale of its taking woven with sorrow into the long cloth of Gondor's history. Yet even as the veil turned to loathing, and the fair tower was bent to a curse, a seed was left in shadow. Men and women who had learned without a stone to see, and without a king to stand, until a time beyond their sight, when other horns would sound, and other beacons wake, and all that had been taken would be accounted for in the end.